Mass timber needs steel, and steel needs mass timber. These two don't grow by beating each other. They grow together through hybrid structures, and just as much through hybrid teams. When this happens, the design gets more efficient, the build goes smoother, and the owner walks away impressed with what both materials can do. And then they come back and build the next one the same way. That repeat business is how mass timber is going to scale. And scale is what turns it into real impact. On carbon, on housing, on forest health, the stuff that everybody in this industry says they're here for. To get into all of that, I've got 4 people who sit in different seats at the same table. Nick Milestone is the COO of Mercer Mass Timber, and he came up through the structural steel world before moving into timber. He says that the fastest path to scale isn't pure mass timber. It's hybrids that drop into the workflows that the steel industry already runs on, meaning CLT decks on a steel frame. Cold-form steel and CLT can take mid-rise structures past the height where wood taps out and go after concrete structures directly. And Greg Kingsley is the current director of R&D and the past president and CEO of KLNA, one of the most respected and experienced firms in both steel and mass timber engineering. He says that standardizing how the buildings go together, i.e. the connections and the erection sequence, is something that the steel industry has already done and something that the mass timber world can greatly benefit from. Kobe Faust is a 4th-generation ironworker whose company erected the Walmart headquarters campus, the largest mass timber project built in North America so far. And he's one of the earliest ironworker companies to move into mass timber. His point is a core piece of this episode. Those hybrid buildings need a hybrid crew, ironworkers and carpenters. Each brings unique skills and efficiencies to mass timber projects that make them successful. And Tom Bond. He came up on the manufacturing side and now consults across both worlds. He makes the case that the all-timber showpieces are the 1%ers. The other 90%, the real market potential for mass timber, is hybrid. And getting good at those types of buildings means getting comfortable being uncomfortable. If you're designing, engineering, or building with mass timber, this is a conversation you need to hear. Because the future isn't all timber or all steel, it's both, the right material in the right place, put up by a crew that works exactly the same way. The building's a hybrid, so is the team that builds it. But before we start, if you're getting something out of this show, our newsletter will keep you up to date on what's happening in the mass timber world, and our annual summit is where you get to connect with leaders in the industry. Both are linked below. All right, let's get into it. Well, thanks for joining me, gentlemen. Today, we're going to talk about mass timber hybrid systems and what that means for the mass timber industry here in North America moving forward. And so my first question is going to be for you, Nick. You've watched mass timber grow a little bit more widespread and be more adopted across multiple different countries with some slower starts than others, we'll say. What's the pattern that you're seeing on those markets that did take off?
So let's look at glulam, which is deemed a mass timber product. Glulam is nothing new. It's been around for 100 years plus. The first ever glulam building was in 1896 in the registry office in Southampton. It's evolved through gluing technology and manufacturing technology, but what has really sort of changed the dynamics of mass timber is cross-laminated timber. CLT panels, which came out of Austria in the early 2000s for the Austrian housing market. And what you see there is a sustainable business model based on demand. That is about the availability of fiber, that's the availability of technical aspects, the availability of engineering, construction, and manufacturing. And it's kind of grown outside of Europe as a sustainable market. It was no surprise that when it kind of hit the shores in the US in around 2013 to 2016, it was the start of the evolution of the mass timber industry in North America, which is the only true sustainable market outside of Europe, that being Canada and the US. And I think and I've been involved in mass timber projects, say in the Middle East and Far East, and these are very spot markets. When I say by spot markets, they're one-off projects because it's about the behavior of the region of the planet. Is the timber accessible? It's often reliant on cheap labor and concrete, which is the default build system, if you like, and the demographics, the population, and the building typology as well. Mass timber suits or lower framed structural solutions, and not maybe high rise 30, 40 stories of where steel and concrete can grow. But if you also look on the planet, say places like Australia, New Zealand, again, it's about a sustainable model where you've got, call it advanced democracies that has social impact, the use of green technology combined with offsite technology combined with minimum wage, then you kind of get that mixture of where the application of the building typologies that will accept mass timber come from. So it's not about where it hasn't failed, it's about the adoption rate. And you've got to bear in mind that we're only 26 years into this journey because CLT has been the true disruptor. Glulam's kind of followed in its path to play catch up with it.
Got it. Greg, how does that compare to what you've seen in here in the States and maybe even North America wide, and like where we're at right now as an industry?
Well, I don't have anything like the international perspective that Nick has, but looking locally, I can definitely reinforce that here the thing that caught on, that really worked, and really I speak from the demand side, right, on the design side of the equation, right, and the thing that really caught on was the number of problems that mass timber solved all at once. We just started pretty recently thinking about embodied carbon and biogenic carbon, even biophilic sort of atmospheres from, that architects have been really pushing for. Those things got everyone's attention really quickly, and then there's a little bit of a novelty and a newness factor that's got everybody excited about it as well. And so on that side, I'll say what worked is, I mean, massive interest in the architectural and ownership community in moving things forward. But I'll also say that when it doesn't always work, and when it hasn't worked, it's sometimes when people try to put mass timber, sort of the square peg in a round hole, right? When they just get so in love with the idea of mass timber and all those things that I just listed that it does well, that they try to hammer it into any building that they're working on. And so when it works, and when it works really well and takes off, in our experience, is when there's this alignment between the material itself, what it does, what it naturally does well, um, and the building form, and the form, the function, and so on, where you just respect the behavior of the material and how it works, right? Along with other materials as well. I think we're here to talk a little bit about hybrid construction, and that's a big piece of it, where you use mass timber where it's best and where it's best suited, and in that regard, then it really has taken off for us. So we've seen quite a number of successful projects, and a lot of them have that in common.
Real quick, if you're getting value from this podcast, you should join us at the Mass Timber Group Summit. Every year, we bring together the design, build, and ownership teams that are pushing mass timber forward for 3 days in Denver. It's a pretty networking forward event, and our sessions focus on the newest and most innovating topics that'll help you stay ahead in the industry. Everybody leaves with connections that'll move their business and their projects forward. Click the link below or go to masstimber.group to get registered. And so it's a combination of market meets opportunity, but respecting how the different materials play together, like especially in a hybrid building. One question I have is the building industry in general is a little bit slow to adopt newer technologies, but the ones that do come up, generally there's some spectacular flameouts, right? Whether that's through modular, different offsite systems, etc. And so my question for Nick is, what makes a mass timber manufacturer successful, financially healthy, and is like the biggest determinant of longevity? Like, how do we make sure that this disruptor is around for a long time and it doesn't go by the wayside?
Listen to the market. Listen to, and it goes back to what Greg said, it's about market demand. What is the market asking for? There's an evolution. And like you just said, to that point of saying modular, I've seen many modular companies come and go. It doesn't have to be just in mass timber, all forms, timber frame, cold form steel, precast concrete. That's the build system. The way mass timber fits in perfectly is to adapt to its landscape. So if I use my experience in the UK, it was quite a simple evolution of just replacing the precast concrete or the metal deck and concrete floor solutions with CLT. on a steel frame. That was just a straight win and an easy win, it ticked all the right boxes for speed of construction, schedule benefits, lightness, everything else. And it's about listening to what the market wants and giving back the solution. Don't go to the market with reinventing the wheel. The market will not buy it. That's what doesn't make it sustainable. And we're seeing that change now. You know, we've seen since my first involvement this side of the world in 2016 to here we are 10 years later, we're starting to see now the steel industry embrace mass timber as, you know, the one company that will form the solution. So rather than bringing multiple sub trades of a mass timber installer or a steel installer, no, just one company will define all the logistics and piece count, and it works symbiotically. And we learned in the steel industry that mass timber adopts beautifully because it's, and I use the term symbiotic. It's designed, manufactured, and installed within 16th of an inch tolerance. And if it fits in the model, it fits in the job site, and it's prefabricated with zero waste. We don't give enough kudos to the steel industry. The steel industry came to life in the 1960s as the industrial revolution behind concrete, but it was the original off-site solution. And with the advancements in technology and prefabrication, and the fact that we use the same business process and the same modeling techniques as the steel industry does, then that's why it just works beautifully. But for a manufacturer to be truly sustainable, it has to adapt to the market by supporting engineering support, by offering manufacturing drawings, by even offering install solutions. It's about being everything to everybody. The market will change over the coming years for sure, and manufacturers will go to more of a semi-commodity kind of world where it's just producing CLT. But right now, you have to be very, very versatile and adaptable to what the market is asking for.
And so I heard you talk about symbiotic relationships, and I think I heard you give an example of like decking, right? Using CLT in place of the decking. And maybe this is a dumb question, but if you're a mass timber manufacturer, like the lifeblood of your company is panel throughput. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. It's volume. Yep.
And so if we're looking at the symbiotic relationship right now and working with the steel industry, that looks like the decking side of things. Is that fair to say?
Oh, absolutely. And I'm not doing glulam any sort of disrespect, far from it. You know, glulam is good for, say, a small office, a two-story office building. But when you've got a building that's maybe 10, 20, 30 stories in structural steelwork, well, you're not going to get glulam to stand up to those kind of heights and those compressions. So therefore, CLT becomes the obvious defined choice of material. It's about working with each other to come up with solutions. Greg kind of alluded it earlier on. If you're trying to put mass timber into places where you can't make it stand up, and we do have purists out there that want 100% mass timber, well, your design is going to be very hard to justify, but secondly, nobody's going to pay the cost. And it's all about cost versus carbon. And the amount of CLT that goes into a building with the steel frame, one actually offsets the other to make it an actually carbon neutral structural solution.
And so if we're looking at CLT as that disruptor, that lifeblood, that symbiotic relationship, Greg, in your experience, who's having this conversation on the project teams? Is it starting with the manufacturers? Does it start with somebody on your team? Like, where are you hearing that start?
Well, you have to know that I'm a designer and I wear designer glasses, and so everything starts with us. So that's the beginning of everything. So actually, that's where those first conversations are happening, right? And it's actually why it's really so good to know all these people in the industry. Everyone's around the table that you've brought here today. These are the kind of people that have been a part of my world for a couple of decades, and it's been really helpful to bring the right insight to that table at the very beginning and bring the right people at the beginning. Sometimes it's a little bit at odds. I know Nick is very interested in throughput and maximizing fiber volume through the system. And of course, I'm very interested, as everybody is here, with cost. And maybe the first thing I'm trying to do is minimize the amount of fiber that's going through the system, because that's going to be the first driver of cost in a mass timber building, is going to be the volume of wood fiber, and most of that volume is in the panels that we're talking about, right? And um, so one of my optimization is just trying to get the most out of every panel that I possibly can, in addition to the most of every other material that I have. So I don't know if that answers your question, Nick, but it starts at the design team. And I'd add that something I'll probably say over and over, which is that the sooner you can get the other folks at the table, well, the better it is. I always go back to we've been integrated builders and designers of steel structures for a long time, and the first time many years ago, I sat with a steel erector when we were doing schematic design of a building, and I realized that the decisions I was making and where the splices and the beams were going had every effect in the world, influence on where the erector was able to put the crane and how far his reach was and how much that crane was going to cost. And so I thought, wow, these folks got to be, have to be sitting with me while that's all going on. And that's kind of an ideal scenario. And sometimes, many times, we've succeeded at pulling that scenario together. Doesn't work every time, but we do it as much as we can. And so that's the real answer.
And that's a good answer.
If I could just absolutely compliment what Greg's just said. So we talked about volume throughput. So if Greg, say, redesigns a structure from, say, a 5-ply to a 3-ply, from a manufacturing perspective, we can get more panels through our press at once than we can with a 5-ply. So we can get 3-plies in rather than 2, say, 5-plies. That makes a big difference to productivity. So actually, Greg working to engineer out the volume is that better for the manufacturer, because we get more throughput as productivity goes.
And I did a poll recently where I asked, hey, what is everybody seeing being like the biggest obstacles for mass timber construction? And the top answer was cost. And the second answer was experienced teams, talking about the things that we talked about over the last few minutes. How do you think that this hybrid approach fits into that conversation for cost and for being able to tap in experienced teams?
Well, fair warning, I can talk about this for about 2 hours, and so there won't be any time left for anybody else. Cost it's always the top of the list, and cost is driven by a whole lot of things. Some of them are completely out of my control as a designer, right? The price of lumber, on the open market is not anything I can speak to, but I can speak to, as I sort of said already, optimizing timber volume, right? That's a key one. I also think a lot about constructability. One of the great things that mass timber brings to the market is speed of construction, prefabrication, maximizing off-site labor instead of on-site labor, and that involves, those are design choices, right? I always tell people, mass timber doesn't build fast because it's made out of wood. It's built fast because it's prefabricated, and we design it to build quickly, right? Which has to do with how it goes together, right? So at KLNA, we spend a lot of time thinking about connections, and what their individual cost is and how they're going to go together. A phrase I stole from Ralph Austin at Seagate Mass Timber a long time ago is drop and go connections. Because I love the idea, we just like the idea that the crane can come in, pick something up, drop it down, let it go pick something else up while they're working to make the connection, and it doesn't have to hang there, right? And so all those decisions actually have quite a lot to do with cost, right? And so we think about that. We also think about being responsible about just how bespoke our mass timber is, right? The amazing advances in CNC cutting and what we can actually, what we can do is not something that we should let ourselves do on every project if we're trying to manage cost, right? Because CNC cutting on a mass timber panel, they're really heavy and they're really big, and it takes a lot to flip them over and move, so we can do it, but we have to be very careful about what we ask the industry to do if we're trying to keep our eyes on cost. I should, I'll stop there, except for I have to bring up another one that a favorite project that I'm working on with Nick right now that is not it's not a hybrid project, but the width of the building, it's a 12-story building, the width of the building is 60 feet, and we're dropping in 12 by 60-foot panels that cover the entire building width in each crane pick. So 720 square feet of floor area with every crane pick. It's really impressive.
Got it.
So, that's a way of thinking that involved literally designing the building around what Mercer could deliver in that case, right? So, that's a total success.
Nick, what would you add to the cost question, and then also the experience of different teams across the different industry? Like, how do those two come together in the hybrid conversation to push mass timber forward?
Yeah, and so good example. We've been working with a developer to come up with a build system solution. So it's not just about the mass timber; it's about the build system solution. And Greg and I have been heavily involved for many years on bringing about our CFS CLT solution. Why CFS CLT? And this is a really good example. Because timber frame is great up to 5 stories. You won't build in much above 5 stories because timber frame will just not physically stand up structurally. The CFS CLT models allows to take the short span accommodation model up to maybe 10, 12 stories. And of course, CLT is about 70% of the construction because that's in the floor area. But what it does, it gives us a challenge to take on the RC frame market. So we've been working with a developer, and we managed to save 10% of the construction costs by doing an alternative build system. So if we drive it back down to cost, it was, I think, $15, $17 a square foot cheaper than concrete. It reduced 3 months off the construction schedule. It was lighter, so it impacted the foundation design. But the fact that you could have multiple subtrades working internally and externally at the same time. So all these factors are more holistic when designing with mass timber. You don't just look at the direct cost per square foot. Okay, in this equation, yeah, we were cheaper, but the fact that, or more competitive, but the fact you look at it holistically, and it is about what Greg said, it's about a prefabricated technology, which is off-site solution. And of course, having the ability to manufacture a 60 by 12 foot panel has huge benefits. We worked with Kirby Faust down at the Walmart campus, and doing 60 by 12 reduces the number of picks on the job site, which then improves productivity, that you're covering a greater area with fewer picks on the job site. Going back to the question on knowledge, when you're only 10 years young in North America, that knowledge runs right through the ecosystem. So we're talking about structural engineers, we're talking about BIM coordinators, we're talking about structural detailers, we're talking about the install crews. It's momentum that's created just by pure experience. And I was very fortunate to meet Kirby Faust at a mass timber conference 4 years plus now in Chicago. And it was a hybrid conference of steel and mass timber, yet the only steel installer in the room was Kirby Faust. So of course, my background in steel, like I latched onto Kirby. Well, that's just yielded out a beautiful relationship where we've been working with each other now for 3 years plus on projects and many more going forward. Because what you've got is somebody who understands, respects the material, but also understands the dynamic of both say, steel and mass timber coming together, which therefore makes the perfect partnership. And the install sequence actually drives the whole procurement process in where you start to build the job and where do you start, what corner of the building do you start. That works right back up to where you start designing it, because we can't just design buildings in a permanent position. We have to design the buildings in a temporary state condition for buildability. So this is where, to Greg's point of who do you bring in first? Yeah, of course you need the designer. It's about the hand in the glove. You also need your manufacturer, because therefore, how do you gain the efficiencies in the connection design, in the panel design? But you also need your installer as well on how we're going to build this thing efficiently, safely, and with productivity. It's the 3 parts of the ecosystem: design, manufacture, install.
And Tom, you've come from the manufacturer on the mass timber side. Now you're doing a lot of work with the ironworkers. What would you add to this conversation?
I would say, in my experience, we'd see projects die on the line because they're not designed correctly. And you're putting 10 pounds of stuff in a 2-pound bag, right? I mean, everybody wants a super cool, beautiful mass timber building, which is great. Those are the 1%ers, if we're being honest. I mean, those are the 1%ers. The 90%, the big group, is that hybrid system. And so I really enjoy what I'm doing now because, especially being at this group, I'm in awe of the experience that we have here. But really, that's the key. I mean, my job is to make sure to help the mass timber industry grow, right? And so let's talk about what's the best for that. The best person, contractor, whatever for the job, right? The early integration is key. Design is key to make sure we're doing that. We need somebody, to Nick's point, that knows what they're doing on that. Okay. So to step on the line of ironworkers work, carpenters work, any of that stuff, whoever's best suited for the job should be on the job, right? Depending on the build and on the structure, that's what we need to bring to the table so we have that experience. Ideally, if you can write one contract to do multiple scopes of work, that's incredible, right? If we're driving costs down and doing all that stuff, that's what we're really driving to do. If we can have faster erection times, the cost of materials are going to be relative to the project, but if you can get that project done faster, ahead of schedule, more efficiently, safer and more efficiently, that's the answer to that. So I don't want to stand and talk about, who's better suited for that. I think it's a job by job basis, and I really think we need to put our big boy pants on and look at that first. Because you get a lot of times you get up in arms about that sort of thing, and really, who's best suited for the job? What kind of cake are we going to make? A chocolate cake needs chocolate cake ingredients. A vanilla cake needs vanilla cake ingredients. And so I think, like we talk about hybrids, I think there's a lot of consideration to a successful project with having, in a lot of cases, a composite crew. I know that Faust runs that. There's things that these folks do really well, and there's things that these folks do really well. So that's really it. It's just getting past this whole weird spot that we're in, everybody trying to grasp on and hold on to their secrets, right? Versus a one rise, all rise type deal. There's enough work out there for everybody. As these projects come along, if we're looking at the bulk, the 90% that are hybrid, man, we can really rock that stuff. And let's keep the 1%ers how they're doing. They're super cool. They're amazing. But at the end of the day, I think that's the solution to this problem.
Yeah, and if I could kind of add real quick to about driving cost, it's kind of what we're all talking about. It starts at the beginning. It's the team that gets gathered up from designer to installer to manufacturer, and that they come together and they have such a tight-knit coordination with them and the GC that the projects are organized, delivered, and erectable. Those when that team doesn't get gathered up, the cost goes up, the efficiencies are lost. The pre-planning is so critical to the success of a project. I just can't speak enough about that.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I want to circle back a little bit to Tom's like a rising tide lifts all boats kind of thing. I think we talked a little bit about, hey, if we don't want to fight the market, right? We want to go where the market's going, right? And so if we're talking about a hybrid, maybe that's CLT 4Dex structural steel. Is there anything else that the mass timber industry can look at and learn from the ironworkers that would help move that forward? We talked a little bit before we had hit record on, and you had alluded to it a little bit, Greg's like, what's the standard here? It's like, you sat next to a steel erector and you learned, hey, if I do my job this way, it makes his job way easier. But because the industry is so young, that standardization doesn't really exist. And so I guess the question I'm getting at is, Tom, is there like a standardization issue or lesson that mass timber could pull from steel, and like how would that help the industry?
I agree, and yes, there is, and I'll speak to this a little bit, and then I'm going to turn it over to Nick and Greg on this. But right now we're still Wild West with mass timber, right? You ask the steel industry how big a hole needs to be for a 3/4 inch bolt. Every one of the fabricators will tell you it's a 13/16 inch hole, and it's a standard, and AISC owns that standard, right? So I think what we need to get to is adopting similar to what the steel industry has. I would love to whoever's listening out there from AISC, we're starting to have these conversations with that, and I would love to talk about that, because right now Mercer, Smart Lam, Element 5, Kalesnikov, everybody, you name it, they all have their own standards and make their own things, which is great, right? We don't want cookie cutters of everything. That's not what we're trying to get for. But when we're designing these buildings with specifics to Greg's point, a 12 by 60 panel, right? Not everybody has that 12 by 60 panel, but what about whole size connections? We all know how key connections are on that. So if we had some standards and standardization and oversight of that, I think that's really where the direction we need to go to really keep this thing moving in the right trajectory. Nick, is that somewhat close?
Yeah, do you know what? I faced the same issues dealing with the European supply chain 20 years ago, where you had different manufacturers, Binder, Storer, KLH, offering different panel sizes, thicknesses, and we really had to understand their products. Glulam was actually quite a straightforward, standardized component. So how did we adapt? And bearing in mind, we were a steel company. We designed, we manufactured, we installed. So what we did, we worked closely with the AISC equivalent in the UK called the BCSA, the British Construction Steel Association. And at the time, I was fortunate to find myself as the chairman of TRADA, the Timber Research Development Association, which was a third-party non-for-profit. And what we realized was we needed to create a bunch of standards. And these standards were more reflective of the build system, not the product itself. And these standards would cover for the design, manufacture, and install of a mass timber building or even a hybrid building. So we worked with the regulatory body of the steel industry, the AISC equivalent, and we came up with a national structural mass timber specification for the UK construction market, which was actually not plagiarized, but it was a parallel version of what we call the Black Book, which is the steel construction standards on design, manufacture, and install. We covered a whole lot more. We covered the issues pertaining to fire, durability. We worked with the insurance companies on how they would perceive and protect the premiums of the industry to keep costs down. So really, we replicated, emulated what the steel industry had done for so long, for so well, and put this sort of standard guardrails for the mass timber industry. To Tom's point, is it a bit maverick? Is it a bit all over the place? To a degree, yes. But I think the learnings from the steel industry were absolutely pivotal for the growth of the mass timber industry in the United Kingdom. And I think, if we did the same, and I always believe that the mass timber industry in North America would grow exponentially off the back of the steel industry. So as long as we gain parallels together, working in tandem together.
How would that standardization trickle down into your work, Greg?
Well, you guys have opened the door for me to use one of my tiredest old jokes, which is my theory of construction costs. I call it the economic theory of what I built yesterday, which basically says the cheapest building you can make is the one that looks exactly like the last one the contractor built, right? Which sounds like a joke, but it's really just saying that's how risk is managed, right? That's how they understand. I understand how this works. I know how it's going to go together. I can predict the time. I know how much it's going to cost. And really at the heart of that is what we're talking about is about standardization, right? And what can be done to make each project, or at least the bones of each project, look like a standardized system. I think a lot of people know, I'm just ripping off of what Tom said. I like working with the wacky architects and making completely bespoke buildings as much as anyone, maybe more than most people. But those are fun. But if we really want to solve the problems, the challenges we have with housing, with embodied carbon, with forest health, and all the things that mass timber affect, we have to start doing it at scale, and we have to start accepting the idea that the bones of these buildings need to be standardized. And I mean, just from this conversation, I'm getting the idea that steel buildings don't all look alike, right? Because what's been standardized, as Tom said, is what size hole to drill for a 3/4 inch bolt, right? And there's no reason why the mass timber industry can't focus on standardizing not the building form, but how the building goes together. So I think we have a lot of work to do, but things are going to really take off when we can pull that off.
Yeah. And Kobe, you're an ironworker. You've also worked on some pretty high profile projects. I think Nick named one. And that story about you being the only ironworker at that hybrid conference kind of caught my attention. So from an ironworker's perspective, like, how are you looking at mass timber in the conversations that we've had so far?
Yeah, we look at it with a great amount of excitement. It's life material that's replacing structural steel in all shapes, forms, and locations on the job site. And we talk about wild west. A little bit of everything's getting replaced with mass timber, so it's pretty exciting. We 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 s- we started looking at it as, okay, just because of my background and what I know, that iron workers are going to be performing 100% of that work on site. It didn't take us long to understand that the scariest thing to hear when I'm walking on that job site is an iron worker hollering for a sawzall. That starts to look like a lot of dollar signs going down the road real quick. After a couple of projects that we did, we kind of switched up what we did, and we really drove to put different crafts, different trades in places that they are successful for the knowledge and training that they have. So we started running composite crews with ironworkers and carpenters, and really that's what I see the future is in these projects. It takes both to make these projects successful when it comes to safety and production and floor turnovers, to allow other subs to get on the job site and get to work and have quick turnarounds and completions on the projects.
So I heard you say you run kind of a composite crew, right? You got ironworkers, you got carpenters. What are you having each one do, and why do you run a composite crew versus all ironworkers or all carpenters, etc.?
Yeah, so when let's say you walk out to one of our project sites, and what do you see? The ironworkers doing the carpenters. The ironworkers are rigging, unloading the trucks, rigging, sending it up to a pretty standardized common raising gang, erect in the building. Ironworkers are temporary bracing the material off, plumbing, racking, doing a lot of the bolted connections. But along with that, a lot of these systems have a lot of screwing and fastening systems. So the carpenters are in there involved in all of those final screwing. Um, as much pre-planning and coordination that takes place, there's always going to be a hiccup because humans are involved in material getting shipped out to site. How do we mitigate that and get that fixed to keep everything rolling? Is we've got to repair it on site. Well, when it comes to the mass timber side, carpenters are a natural fit. They work with the material all the time. They're phenomenal at layout. They take care of that product because they're very familiar with it. And I kind of bounce back to my whole deal about having an ironworker hauler for a sawzall. When that first happened, there was a little bit of a clearance issue on a CLT panel that went around a wide flange beam column. And they hauled it up for a sawzall, and I caught it about mid-step, and I ended up buying a new CLT panel because their layout was a little bit wrong. So are we going to find some really good finished carpenters type people that are ironworkers? Well, sure, we definitely will. But the primary drive of that trade is bolting, AISC knowledge, the all the code and requirements around all of that. Any kind of welding taking place on the job sites, that's all in the wheelhouse of the ironworker trade. The finish work, refinishing, final screwing, splining, a lot of layout. We find it best to put the carpenters in those roles and be successful. And honestly, though when we first started, I was really concerned about disruption amongst the crews working so tightly in among each other. Honestly, we've had nothing but success from it. There might be a couple of days of the different crafts kind of poking at each other, but as long as we hold high expectations of how that project's going to operate between the two crews coming together, it actually is a very pleasant, enjoyable job site that everybody works together for successful jobs.
And that's great insight. And a follow-up question I would have to that is for teams that don't take that kind of composite approach, or maybe it's one or the other. Do you see any money getting left on the table in terms of maybe budget, risk, rework, uh, labor, multiple subs being managed? Like what are the advantages of running that composite crew for the building owner?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's all the above, right? Iron workers are well trained and skilled at rigging, hoisting, placing with a production rate schedule, right? So trucks coming in, stuff's getting rigged, stuff's getting placed fast and efficiently. Damage of material is really mitigated with pre-planning on those projects. The carpenters being able to fix issues, which generally are very far and few between with material coming from the manufacturers of the site, but being able to have that opportunity to do that. When you don't, and the layout, the screwing, the efficiencies and all that the carpenter trades bring to the table to make that job successful. What I see is when you do not do that and you try to do it 100% with iron workers, they're great at getting the buildings up and getting them erected. But now we're going a lot slower, doing all the finish screwing, doing all the repair work and all that. We're losing money on the backside, but vice versa. If I was to look at it by swapping those crews and I'd taken 100% carpenters erecting the building, we're losing a tremendous amount of efficiencies on one of our most expensive parts of the projects, and that's crane time.
Yeah. Well, that's great insight. I'm going to call out a little bit of an elephant in the room. Sometimes I hear that there's concern that the higher labor cost of iron workers going into a mass timber project can make the whole project too expensive. What's been your experience with that?
Our experience with that is running the blended crew to offset that and the efficiency of the iron worker assembling and erecting the building and being able to offset it with the cost of efficiencies there.
I would like to add to that if I could. You know, I recently been building fence out here in the back 40. When I was a kid, I was a pretty damn good fence builder, but now I'm not such a damn good fence builder. So I could have a crew come in that's really good at what they do and pay them really good money and probably be money ahead. So that's how I would relate that back. If you have somebody that's really good at what they do, they can get a heck of a lot more done in a short amount of time, even if their cost per hour is more. I'm not very good at math, but if I have more production in less time, it makes sense there. And I think really that's where this drives this to. Again, having the right crew on the job doing the right stuff that they're really good at is huge benefit for the owners and the ownership team.
Yeah, and being able to have that production rate with the safety surrounding all of that, from my viewpoint and experience, and this is what we drive, is that we have clean, fluid turnovers of zones of areas so other subcontractors can get in behind us. Because really, I mean, yeah, it's great, it's glorious that we're out there as the erector, the installer, getting this stuff done. But what really matters at the end of the day is completion of that project so the ownership can occupy it and start making money off of their investment. And that's where the composite type crew that we believe is the best direction for this product to go makes the most sense.
And if you had to point to a project that you've done with this approach that had a really good outcome, what would you point to?
Honestly, every one that we have performed since we started performing them this way. But if I had to cherry pick the best projects, it was definitely the ones that we performed with Mercer down in Bentonville, Arkansas, on the Walmart campus. Unbelievable, stringent timelines. Just a lot of stress on everybody, including the labor on site. And we were able to perform the work extremely efficiently and safely because of the skilled labor that we had on the project site.
Nick, would you add anything to that or point to some other examples?
How we deliver enough product to the job site in advance. We worked with Kobe on how he was going to install it. And it was we tried something new as well. We had our own edge protection system, a proprietary edge protection system that we designed many, many years ago for mass timber. And we wanted to use it on the project at Bentonville. And Kobe's team just adapted to it beautifully. And it actually helped with productivity and safety on the job site, because above anything else, it's okay throwing, an army of labor at the project. It's got to be done safely. Safety is absolutely paramount to productivity, and a safe site is a profitable site. That's how we kind of look at everything. And we worked well, with the challenges, and what Kobe had done, he had his composite crew of mixing it with carpenters as well, which was perfect for us, because the carpentry is the finishing, and the framing behind the installers, because the installers think of pick time. That's thinking how a steel installer thinks. But then you've got to think about the finishing and the handed over. And that's why we worked really well together.
Yeah, thank you. What about on a hybrid building that you guys have done, Nick, in general? Like, can you point me to a project that embodied this hybrid concept and kind of the outcomes of taking that approach?
Yeah, I mean, we've worked with many hybrid projects, and what we've done, and we've acted as the super sub where we've taken control of the install. So if there's more mass timber than there is steel, we'll put steelwork in our package. And the reason why it just makes so much more sense, because then the general contractor, it's not splitting the subtrades. The minute the subtrades get split, it leads to a multitude of problems. And one of the biggest challenges we have is temporary bracing. Uh, who's got what temporary bracing and what part of their scope? It's so important that the mass timber and the hybrid solution is installed by just the one company that takes care of the lift plans, the crane plans, the temporary works installation. There's more to it than just the two pieces coming together and fixing beautifully. It's the thought process done by one company which drives the success of the projects. We've been involved in many hybrid projects. You need one installer on the job site, not two.
Yeah, that's a great example. Thank you.
And just to add to that real quick, so I agree with that wholeheartedly, but also from the installer outlook, if I'm in bid process and I looked at another contractor's coming in to install the mass timber and we're only installing the structural steel, what kind of risk do I need to build into my budget for that? It's a great deal. So when we look at it as installing both scopes, it's more efficient not only for the project, it's less headache for the general contractors, the steel suppliers, and for the mass timber supplier, because the coordination amongst a consolidated crew to make it successful.
If I could jump in on that, I just have to say that as KLNA, we're steel erectors, and we're now doing mass timber erection with steel erection for exactly the reason that Kobe and Nick are bringing up, right? We see this combined issue, and it's just crystal clear that having one erector, one brain installing and coordinating those things together is clearly an answer to that problem. So I just wanted to reinforce what those gentlemen said.
Yeah, and those are both great examples. I use the analogy for American football to be the more handoffs you have, the more chances for fumbles, right? So that makes sense to me. So as we package this conversation up, going back to the hybrid is the meat and potatoes of what the industry could be growing on. That's going to involve bringing in different partners from the steel industry. What actually has to change at the manufacturer level, at the project team level for mass timber to scale the way that we're talking about? And I'll give that first question to Greg.
I can probably give you a few answers to that. One thing is already changing, and it's already been brought up, is that the steel industry immediately or early on really saw mass timber as a competitor, as a challenge, right? And so they were really kind of fighting the growth of mass timber, and I see a real change there. I mean, we're working directly with AISC right now to develop new rolled shapes for the steel, for the steel mills that are specifically designed to coordinate and cooperate with mass timber and precast and other systems, because they too see hybrid as the answer, through the systems, and they're kind of like, well, they better get on the train because that's where it's going, and they've been actually really great to work with. In fact, we had, I think, 10 people at the NASC conference, which is the National Steel Conference in Atlanta last week. And we gave 2 presentations on hybrid structures with mass timber. both in cooperation with AISC, and they were very well received. And so, so the one thing that's changing is really the attitude of our former competitors, let's just put it that way, people realizing that there's plenty to go around for everybody, and deciding to work with everyone. That's working really well. I'll add another answer in because it's sort of the founding principle of our whole company, and we haven't really changed the entire world just yet, but the whole notion of project delivery and being able to get multiple the different players at the table early on and getting things closer to what people call integrated project delivery will really help lower costs in the end. That's been our direct experience. The design, bid, build process is predicated at the outset on the commodification of all the materials that are involved. The assumption is everything you buy is identical to everything else, and the only difference is whatever the small difference is that different people can bring to the table to make those things cheaper. And that is not what the mass timber or any hybrid structure is like by any stretch, right? And so changing just project delivery methods and getting away from that age-old system to a little bit more integrated cooperative system will change the world.
That's a great answer. Nick, what would you say?
Do you know what? All of the above what Greg just said. I think he caught it beautifully. I give you a good example. We have in-house 8 structural engineers, not because we want to be the engineer of record, far from it, but we get situations where we get design assistant delegated design. And that is to support the EOR, because when we've got early involvement, it's about how we can make the building more efficient, more buildable, how we can reduce waste. And, I think the most successful buildings I've been involved in throughout my career is about using the right material in the right place. And goes back to everything, goes back to cost versus carbon. I think back to where I was 2 decades ago, and the retailers in the UK wanted to go to having, green structures, which was the use of glulam. It was a case of where can we make the building more efficient with steelwork, the bracing, horizontally and vertically, using steel sections as opposed to timber sections for efficiency and size. How we can get away from deep structural glulam beams to create bowstring trusses. So we've got light and the services to penetrate through the roof. Back of house, maybe where the client doesn't see, use a structural steel frame where it's got heavy plant loadings. So it is about the early involvement for the manufacturer, but the manufacturer's got to be able to bring engineering capability to the party, because it's not about pushing product or selling product. It's about an efficient build system, because once you've done that template once and created standardization, you've got more chance of it rolling out and scaling it up as well. And what we talked about standardization, working with the steel industry on standards and process and everything else, but we will start to create repeatability as well. And therefore, we'll get more people coming to the party who are more familiar with the products.
Yeah, another great answer. And I'll pitch it to you now, Kobe, with the emphasis on like the constructability of these buildings, like what needs to change with the way that we're doing things now for the mass timber to really take off.
It all comes back to the standardization. We started those conversations ourselves 3 years ago with AISC, and kind of like Greg had said earlier, kind of with a little bit of pushback at the time, right? Because it's material replacing structural steel. It's becoming more of a coffee talk now, right? And sit down and discuss it. AISC is really starting to embrace it and get engaged, and that standardization to assist everybody from start to finish to get the product on or get the material on the project site is what's really going to help drive the mass timber success.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. And so I'll end our interview on one last question. And it would be, if somebody's watching this, what do you want them to walk away with and do differently on their next project? And I'll start with Tom.
I'm going to say get used to being uncomfortable, right? Comfort kills. So if we can step outside that box a little bit and get comfortable being uncomfortable, I think that's key. That takes a seat along with taking the blinders back a little bit, educating ourselves, and looking to the future. Because if we can change the dynamic just a little bit, right, and use this hybrid approach to doing things, we're going to cover the masses. There's still going to be the amazing 1%er projects that are all wood or that are all steel or have a super funky design or whatever. But the bulk of those projects, how are we going to get them done successfully, and how can we be a part of that? Because there's a big enough pie for everyone to have a piece of it. So that's what I would say is really important for us to go forward and move this industry in the direction we want, industries that we want them to be moving in.
And then Kobe?
You know what? I'd love to kind of change the kind of the mindset is opening up of working with composite crews for erectors moving forward. That's a big success for the project. And end of the day, what do all of us want? Whether we're an owner, we're an employee on the job site, we're a manufacturer, we want business, we want work, we want paychecks. Well, what drives that? Success. Because if the job is not successful, it doesn't come all the way back to the installers, the manufacturers, the design teams, and it starts to die. So if we can start looking at this to set the crews up in their best place possible for their skill set, and we start making installation and project turnovers efficient, less of a headache for the general contractors, very successful for the ownership, it's a giant win for everybody.
Yeah. And Greg, if someone's watching this, what do you want them to walk away and do differently?
Earlier on, I staked the claim as first at the table with the designers, and so I'm going to speak to the designers and say, do not come to that table first with a preconceived notion of what material or system you want to design with. Keep your mind open and don't leave hybrid solutions off the table. Even mass timber, which I love, don't come married to 100% mass timber building. Open your mind to hybrid solutions. Don't leave them behind.
And Nick, I'll let you bring it home.
Wow. That was some really good statements to follow up with. For me, what I learned in the last 2 decades is mass timber buildings actually sells more steel. And therefore, we need the entire steel industry and the AISC to come with us on this journey to create the standards to grow the business. We will grow with the steel industry, and that in turn will grow the steel industry itself. So that I say steel and mass timber is symbiotic 100% from beginning to the end. And let's all bring it home together.
Great way to finish it out. Well, gentlemen, thanks for being with me here today. I appreciate your time, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you very
Brady.
much.
It's a great conversation.
Thanks, everyone.